Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Sustainable Activism webinar. And my name's Lisa Levinson, and I'm the director of our Sustainable Activism campaign. And what we do here at In Defense of Animals is we offer emotional and spiritual tools for animal activists so that we can continue working to help animals for the long haul. So to prevent compassion fatigue and burnout, we present all of these amazing webinars to give you different tools and strategies to continue with your activism. And today, we're really excited to present this webinar on using less plastic and how it is an animal rights emergency. We hope you'll tune in, and it's my pleasure right now to introduce our featured guest today. So I'm going to give you some more information about him. So Miles Lewis, he has been a painter and an art educator in the San Fernando Valley for 10 years. He's passionate about conservation and about mindful living. He decided to leverage his educational skills as a zero-waste presenter in the fall of 2017. He's presented to community gatherings, university and high school classes, and also through individual consultation. And he's currently working on the Ocean Plastics Advocacy 5 Gyres to expand their active educator network around the world. He believes that low-waste mindfulness pairs perfectly with plant-based living as we model and advocate for a world of peace and sustainable abundance. We're really into his motto and his beliefs, and we're so excited to have Miles with us today. How you doing, Miles?
I'm doing well. Hi, Lisa.
Great. Well, this is quite an honor to have an official zero waste educator with us, and we're excited to hear what you have to teach us today.
Sure. So I was thinking, given the title of the webinar, Animal Rights Emergency, I think that most of the audience, as we discussed, Lisa, before we went into this, probably have at least a passing knowledge of how plastic affects the animal world. We've definitely seen, pretty sensational and heartbreaking photos of turtles being affected by straws. Definitely whales in the past couple of months being beached with bellies full of plastic. A lot of fish full of plastic. Seabirds. I think it's something like I forget exactly what the statistic is, but somewhere between 40 and 70% of seabirds are directly impacted by plastic and have plastic in their system. Sort of recognizable bits of plastic. Of course, that causes death in a sort of an orderly and obvious way, but it also accumulates in microplastic pollution throughout the food chain. All of us have plastic in our bodies right now. And so what that means in terms of human health and in terms of the health of the environment is still being studied so that we can act accordingly. But we know that it can't be a good thing. Hopefully it is more neutral than it is extreme, but certainly millions of animals have died because of plastic contamination and consumption. So what I would like to do with this to keep it active, as a group of activists, I really want you to have tools to push for the material economy that we want to see, both in terms of zero waste or eliminating a lot of the disposables that we've gotten used to over the past 50, 75 years. Past 50, 75 years. But also what biodegradable alternatives look like, what sort of low impact manufacturing processes look like. And so what we're going to go through today is all the things that you can do as an individual, both in terms of personal change and in terms of advocacy, and a sort of comprehensive and easily accessed list of the different products and organizations that are working within this space. Because I want this to be positive, active, not so much about the scientific statistics, which, like I said, are still kind of coming out, but more about what you can do right now since we understand the problem. We created it completely. We understand the problem. Plastic has never existed before in this form, for sure. So what we can do from there. So I guess we'll flip right to a screen share where I will bring up, let's see. Screen share. Lisa, do I click on preview or blue jeans when I am looking for screen share?
You're gonna,
it says click here to start. Okay,
yeah.
Got it. Here we go. Okay. So we're just going to jump right into it. So for everybody's notes, Elisa might have shared it with you already, but you can find this PDF directly downloadable from zerowastewizard.com. I largely am presenting to middle and high school students, often about professional opportunities in this space. And so Zero Waste Wizard was a way to make it, playful. It's sort of for the benefit of kids mostly, and then also for the community meetings that I've done. You guys are much more seasoned in all this. I'm going to open it up as a full screen. And we'll kind of breeze through it. At the end, I expect some great Q&A. But, to have a sense of how to comprehensively approach this at whatever level you would like to, just go to zerowastewizard.com, and all this is available for you there. So we're going to jump through. First off, a little bit of introduction. There's a lot of text here because I want this to be available as a guide, but I'll kind of skim through it to make it easy. A philosophical thought. Everyone has two legacies: what they make and do, and the energy and the material they use to make and do things. We almost completely emphasize one, but two is just as real. And so something that got me into this way of thinking is, I'm a son, brother, friend, teacher, husband, citizen, and artist, and I don't want any of these, as much as possible, to have the secondary effect of polluting our environment. Celebrating birthdays, cooking with friends, housekeeping, painting pictures, all of these can be done in a way that is both a service to other people and a service to the earth, or at least has as little footprint as possible. And so I also think of this as an American citizen. I think of it kind of in a patriotic sense, because we created this problem. So we really need to take a step in fixing a lot of it. A huge amount of the ocean plastic we see, for instance, but plastic pollution in general, is coming from East Asia. It is more East Asia than it is America at this point. However, we started this, right? And we have been great innovators in material science. And we can keep doing that. So all of this can be, I think that we can take pride in it. I don't know if everybody here is American, but we can take pride in this as American conservationists as well. And so while simplicity is a timeless objective, I think something that's great about this is that it's really a great time to drastically reduce personal waste. The right information and product alternatives can really help us cut, I'd say, about 80% of our annual average American output of 1,600 pounds of waste per person. And then, of course, comprehensive elimination of particular chemicals, materials, and petrochemical plastics will take corporate and government efforts. We all know that. I'm sure everyone here understands that with animal rights issues, factory farming, things like this, that it really has to happen at an industrial scale. But we're the people who make up the citizenry, and people run these companies, people run the government. We all have to be sensitive to it. So what is waste? It's a human thing. As far as we understand, everything that occurs naturally is recycled naturally. You see this very simple formulation here: producers, consumers, and decomposers, right? That makes up kind of the basic web that we can look at waste within. We go from consumer to waster, which takes us immediately outside of that closed loop life cycle scheme that I have there in that little diagram. So we'll sort of skip through. Again, you can refer back to all this stuff at zerowastewizard.com. Also, if this image isn't that clear to you, feel free to bring that up and you can kind of follow along there. So the ultimate objective here, this is what the activism is moving towards: a closed loop society. So the social objective of zero waste is to promote a closed loop civilization. That's one that reflects the completeness, resilience, and sufficiency of nature. There are many ways of approaching this. A lot of it is reducing and removing what we produced, but some of it also exists in the sort of avant-garde field of biomimicry, trying to make what we do, what we make, much more similar to the processes of nature, which are, inherently sort of self-controlled and non-waste producing. Also, lives of experience. Individually, zero waste encourages a life based on experiences and relationships. Visiting and borrowing and buying secondhand are much better than just, buying and buying and buying. And a wonderful thing is that a lot of technology is making this easier and easier. We're aware of Lyft and Uber and Airbnb and all these scooters that are popping up in, cities all around the country. They're based on sharing models of transportation, sharing models of residency or habitation. And so many things can exist within this paradigm, and hopefully more will be moving that way. Triple bottom line. Business. Any of you who work in business, or anybody who is actively influencing business by writing letters or by advising businesses, always looking for the triple bottom line. I'm sure many of you are aware of B corporations that have the additional responsibility or certification of being good for people and being good for the planet. So more companies can exist within these three designations. If we think of an oil company, it's good for people in the sense that it allows us a particular kind of functionality, but it's certainly not good for the planet, and it is definitely good for profit. So more and more companies can take on this triple bottom line status. Benefits. It's important to consider, and as I'm sure you guys understand as environmental activists, that environmental action now, it has across the board benefits. It's typically better for health, whether it has to do with plant-based eating or it has to do with zero waste. It has everything to do with peace and liberty. It has to do with sort of detaching yourself from, say, animal bondage, or from food that is making you sick, or from excess ownership or excess consumption. Life can be made better by having less and focusing on personal liberty and relationships over possession. Cost. I know a lot of people are concerned about environmental communication because it often emphasizes or seems to indicate that life will have to become more expensive for it to become greener. And that is definitely not the case with low waste, zero waste, or minimalist living. The environment kind of goes without saying. I'm sure all of you guys are very well exposed to a lot of this, but I have a little statement on that there. And beauty, I think that's something that's very much understated. You know that with other environmental advocacies for sure, but glass, metal, ceramic, and paper are far more beautiful than plastic, right? Empty space is the only eternal decoration. That's a little thing I like to say. And then, I say it as a designer. And if you use permanent and reusable items, you've turned even simple objects into story keepers, which I think is a very important and very understated quality of a material life. A lot of this is actually about increased materialism. It's not about becoming anti-materialistic. It's about really appreciating what you have, appreciating the material world, your own body, what goes into it, etc., etc. It's about having a deep relationship to the material that you surround yourself with, which often means focusing in on a few very high quality items or goods. So savings. So we'll just kind of breeze through this, but I did a little tabulation, often from websites that represented, say, the water bottle industry, facial tissues, etc. And so this is kind of an approximate tab of how much you can save as an individual or as a family of 4 as a standard. So I'm just going to breeze through this because you guys can refer to it on your own. But it came to, with all of these changes, which are pretty easy to do. Easy item eliminations like bottled water, which I'm sure you guys are already aware of, facial tissue, paper towel, garbage bags, many of which, they're very simple, reusable alternatives for. With garbage bags, in many cases, you don't actually need them. In some cases, they might be required. But from there on, we have about $2,500 to $6,000 for a family of 4, and about $1,000 to $4,500 for an individual. It's important to consider that we are all bearing the cost of packaging, and so much of the plastic that has become infrastructural to everyday life. Convenience has happened in many ways. Many things have become more convenient. As far as, packaging, things like this, or water bottles, etc., a lot of it is manufactured demand. These were things that were boiled up or that were put together in, advertising boardrooms, companies figuring out how to make more money, whether it is through packaging or the idea that public water is of lower quality than what is packaged, say, by Arrowhead or Nestle. These are they're schemes, they're scams. And as environmental activists, we're very used to the idea of manufactured demand and greenwashing and just the typical scam. So moving on from there. So here we get right to what you can do today. Short-term plastics, you guys have probably already thought about this, and they're so easy to do without. Plastic bags, utensils, straws, bottles, coffee cups. There are direct replacements for these. I imagine that most of you already have them, but there's a little tab on what you could be saving per year as an American, average for each one of these if you decided to switch over. This could be sort of just your daily kit that allows you not to interface with a lot of the most egregious single-use items. Moderate-term plastics, these are a little less talked about. If we think about razors, floss, toothbrushes, sponges, toothpaste, etc. All of these, I have, little links at the bottom. Zero Waste Home and Life Without Plastic are great places to look, not just for product alternatives, but for all kinds of advice on how to make your own stuff or to buy in a way that has less of an environmental impact. Long-term plastics. So these are probably the least talked about. Synthetic to natural textiles, these are things, use whatever you've got. The best thing to do is to use what you already have. But when you're looking for a replacement, something that you need to make new, synthetic to natural textiles, plastic food containers to stainless steel, synthetic bags to natural fabric and metal storage containers. Something else to state now that we're at this point. So I work with 5Gyres as an educator, as Lisa said, and they have had a few campaigns over time. You guys have probably heard of microplastic beads. 5Gyres help to identify these small plastic beads that are used in toiletries, especially in body washes and stuff like that, as an alternative to pumice, sand, and other natural exfoliants. And they really helped to push for a federal ban that happened under the Obama administration in 2015. So right now they're focused on microfiber pollution. So any synthetic clothing that you use or that you have, all of us certainly have synthetic clothing for the most part, I'm sure. Whether it's nylon or polyester, rayon, fleece, as is used in sweaters, etc. All of these produce small plastic particulate that ends up in the water supply and is now sort of epidemic throughout the environment. So there are going to be, hopefully, moves, perhaps starting in California, to combat some of that. Okay. All right. So behaviors worth dropping, behaviors worth adopting. So again, these are probably things that you're fairly familiar with, but great stuff to share too. Paper. We use a lot of paper totally unnecessarily. Toilet paper. I imagine that after this, most of you are still going to be using toilet paper. My family still does. I know that zero waste and any change that you make around environmental considerations can be difficult when you're dealing with multiple people. But definitely you can switch to better alternatives. Seventh generation is a great alternative. Paper towels, totally overused. People use paper towels to, clean up water spills, which is really crazy. So rags, easy, ancient alternative to paper towels. Kleenex, that is something else that was very much sold to us. Bathroom tissue has been around actually for centuries in many different forms, but Kleenex and the way that we use it ubiquitously is quite new. Handkerchiefs are actually more hygienic, and because you're sort of closing everything in with a handkerchief rather than using Kleenex, dropping it around like kids do, it's very flimsy, and you can end up saving a lot of material, saving perhaps a number of trees in aggregate. But easy stuff to do, easy changes to make. Plastic housekeeping, I'll just kind of leave that for you guys to look into. Zero Waste Home is a great reference for that. Of course, I include that as well. And behaviors worth adopting. Composting is one. Some of you guys may already compost. You might, so composting is often thought of as an ambitious form of gardening, something that you do within that context. But it is good to know that with composting at the industrial scale, of course, industrial, municipal, and also at the local scale, is that it's doing two major environmental jobs. One is that you are limiting contribution to methane off-gassing from landfills. When natural material degrades in the landfill context, it produces methane, which you guys probably know is a very strong greenhouse gas. And also, you're enriching the soil if you compost regularly, which makes it a better sink for atmospheric carbon. So one way I think of a well-composted garden is as a kind of climate victory garden. So that's that. We've got references for all that. Making simple foods from scratch and in bulk is another great thing to do. What I've done, I'm not a super ambitious cook or anything. I'm not canning and all of these things, which is great to do. But, for anything that you use consistently, of course you can save money, and really you can save time over time by and also customize things so that perfectly to your palate. It will probably be healthier too. My family does that with peanut butters. We are also working to do that with good plant milks, maybe like oat milk, stuff like this. And also you can make, great vegan protein snacks and stuff like that with very simple ingredients that you can buy in bulk, eliminating a lot of packaging and having all of those positive side effects. So making simple toiletries, it's very easy to make a whole host of effective, healthy toiletries. This is a great little video that you guys can refer to when you go to the website at Zero Waste Wizard. You can just click on it, and in 2 or 3 minutes, you see how to make 5 or 6 toiletries from 2 to 4 different basic raw materials. Shopping practices. So you guys probably already have some familiarity with this. Beyond just using a reusable bag to take all of your groceries, you can take, small cloth bags for picking up, fruits and veggies, as well as getting nuts in bulk and stuff like that. If you guys have a Sprouts near you, even a Ralph's, or definitely a Whole Foods, they're typically going to have bulk areas. Any natural food stores are typically going to have things like this. And just making sure to bring your own containers. Sometimes you might be a little unsure if your own containers are going to work or sort of pass muster, but always ask questions. Simpler cleaning solutions, there's a link there, so it won't go into that. And entertaining too. I talked about this at the beginning, but celebrations should never be punctuated by the landfill, as far as I'm concerned. So, whenever giving gifts, all of you guys have done this before, wrapping with newspaper, avoiding balloons, which are really just plastic bags with strings. Making table and mantelpiece settings and decorations with natural materials, like with fruits and vegetables, squash and leaves and things like this, or just, little ornaments that your family has as longtime keepsakes. And using your own plates, glasses, and silverware whenever possible, and if not, compostable plates, utensils, and cups. And of course, giving the gifts of experience rather than things is an ultimate in eliminating a lot of waste. So 1 hour setup. So this is my little formulation. I'm just going to check out of here just to see how much energy I have. All right, I've got 5%, all good. All right, so 1 hour setup. So this is a way, just a little, when you plan something, all of you guys have had this experience. When you plan something, it is much easier to act on it, right? And so one of the reasons that I put together this little presentation and started doing zero waste education is that I found that most people were very sympathetic to the idea that we make too much waste and that people would like to make less waste and save money and all the other benefits. But there wasn't really a guide. And so I wanted to bring everything together in a very easily accessed way and also make it totally actionable. So this is a way of approaching that. For one, create a single-use killing travel kit. First one, have a backpack, bag, purse. I'm sure some of you guys already do this, that contains your hot and cold beverage containers, metal utensils, 1 to 3 little fabric bags for snacks or for small purchases, and a handkerchief or rag for general cleaning purposes. That really takes care of a lot of the stuff that you might have to interface with day to day, and it's easy to carry with you in a backpack or a purse. So if you just think of your reusables as, the same thing as your wallet or your car keys or your phone, you will not forget them. A bag, box, or a basket containing jars for wet goods and bags for produce and general bulk goods. Keep that in your car, or you keep that near your front door, however you shop. That helps you to get into the routine. And then this is something that I think people don't talk about as much, but for bathroom and kitchen supplies, what I often recommend is just buying things as a collection. Since this isn't an investment or anything, these are just things you are definitely going to use, like, bamboo toothbrush or floss, toothpaste. These are things that you will go through. It's not speculative. So I recommend all of these materials. You can get a box of stuff for your kitchen, a box of stuff for your bathroom, so that when you're done with what you're currently using, you can just switch right out, rather than going, hey, what did Miles say about this? Or do I have to look up zero waste alternatives or whatever? So rather than going through all of that moderation, you will already have the product there for you, and you can get right into the habit of using it. And then here are some compost solutions. Compostables, people don't always know all that is compostable, but especially if you're looking for zero waste packaging and stuff like that, you'll find a lot more backyard compostable materials that can be used. A lot of things can go right into compost. And compost is very satisfying, I have to say. It really feels like you're sort of taking control of your environment. And okay, so we're going to move off. Those are the personal actions that you can take. And so through to the end of the presentation, where we'll get into some of the sort of personal philosophy and advocacy here. So every time you buy something, ask, do I need this and what are the alternatives? Every time you trash something, ask, did I need that and could I have recycled or composted it? And every time you recycle something, ask, did I need this and could I have avoided it or composted it? You keep those ideas gently in mind, and they're not just useful for reducing your waste footprint, but for all approaches to consumption. The more mindful that we can become, all of you guys know this as animal activists, the more mindful that we can become of how we interact with the world, often the more peaceful we can become, the less exploitative, and the more self-sufficient. Something that I would also like to stress for everybody here is that while recycling is a good thing, it has been completely oversold. So when recycling became a big call in the 80s and 90s and into the 2000s, there was definitely improvement in recycling infrastructure in many places where there hadn't been any before. But people often feel fine about using any form of packaging with the sort of hopeful disposal of items in the blue bin or the recycling bin. Because everything conceptually is recyclable, but very little is actually recycled. Materials that are much more recycled are paper, say aluminum, steel in particular circumstances, and glass. Right? These are truly recyclable materials, sometimes almost infinitely recyclable materials. Plastic always downgrades through a recycling process, and most of the time it ends up in the landfill. A lot of the plastic products that we produce are either too small, they're too flimsy, they're contaminated, or they're too low quality. They don't get a high enough price on the market for them to be recycled. So while we should always champion recycling, and recycling is always the best way to go when you're disposing of something, really the solution to our plastic issue, to our whole issue of disposal, has more to do with material innovation as well as change in cultural practices and policy. So here's a list of resources for all you guys, secondhand sources. Best thing to do at all times whenever you're buying something is to buy it secondhand. That is the most environmentally friendly thing that you can do with consumption. Products in general, so Life Without Plastic, Zero Waste Home, NoPlastic.ca, BuyMeOnce.com is an awesome website that really makes you think about how you can consume things once. High quality items that last for a long time or have a lifetime warranty. Clothing, buying natural clothing. Recycling. For some of the harder to recycle items, there is some recourse. If you have an old collection of CDs and DVDs and you're like, what do I do with this? Check out Green Disc. TerraCycle, collect a range of previously unrecycled materials. They're pretty awesome. They are really trying to push what recycling can do. And then there's some blogs for deep dives in DIY. Really awesome resources for how you can, change your everyday. Things that I'm not talking about here that you might not even have thought of, and stuff that can really save a ton of money on the DIY side. So a few more items. These are ways to reduce your impact, both your waste impact and just general environmental. You guys already know about vegan and vegetarian options as animal rights activists. Imperfect Produce is an awesome service. I don't know how extensive they are around the country right now, but they definitely exist around California. Kitchen food wrap replacements, teas and spices, Plain Products, which is a sustainable shampoo service. Get off mailing lists, help to eliminate some of that. Menstrual alternatives, replace plastic ice cube trays with metal, just small items, things that you might not have known of in their alternative format. Sunscreen in recyclable containers, pomade, lip balm, flip-flops, Band-Aids, all of these are kind of one-off products or fields of products that are solid alternatives. Shipping materials, if any of you guys ship goods as a part of your livelihood, Eco-Enclosed is an awesome reference. You can also, get biodegradable stickers and stuff like that through Pure Packaging. You might be able to find them through Eco-Enclosed, so et cetera, et cetera. All right, so we're going to kind of round it up from there. So these are things that you guys may be well aware of as activists. First off, I should say that when you go to zerowastewizard.com, you're going to see some of the major advocacies that are working in this space around plastics pollution and zero waste practices, like the Story of Stuff project, or like Five Gyres. There are a number of, as with any environmental field, there are going to be a number of advocacies that work specifically on policy, like Plastic Pollution Coalition, and others are working, diligently to help move governments to make certain practices either illegal or to reduce consumption and use. You guys may have heard of some of the straw bans that are coming out, which are limited in scope but can signal a big thing for the world as people become more sensitive to these things that we've used for so long. Single-use plastics. There's a whole state in India, and I think actually the entire nation of India is considering a single-use plastics ban. I think Nigeria or one African country has banned plastic bags altogether. If you go there with a plastic bag on a plane, you can be fined. I think a number like a few $100s or something. In America, part of why this problem has been so persistent is that at the same time as we've produced these materials, we've also developed a landfilling infrastructure. In many parts of the world where our plastics and Chinese plastics and other producers are going, do not have the kind of waste management infrastructure that we've developed in tandem with our production. And so it becomes an issue very, very quickly. Rivers full of plastic, just fields full of plastic, land covered. And so there it becomes much more urgent than it feels here, but they signal some kind of the canary in the coal mine, where governments are really considering how to approach this issue. So to be a part of the change that we all want to see, you're always voting with your money. You guys know this. Every time you buy something, every time you take something, you're pretty much screaming to the market to make more of it. Contact your favorite companies. You probably already have done this too, but it can be very positive in the zero waste space. Most of your favorite retailers, service providers, grocery stores, and restaurants are probably not doing their best with waste. A grocery store might be throwing out a huge amount of food. Many of them are. A restaurant may be putting plastic straws in everyone's drink, etc. If you take 5 minutes, I shouldn't have said 30 minutes. That's actually too long. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Send out an email or phone message to your favorite companies. Tell them that you're a happy but concerned consumer who would love to see them take leadership in this. That can be really, really effective. A friend of mine, she was getting an insurance card in plastic, and she said, there's no reason for the 5 million insurance cards or whatever that you're sending out every year, every couple of years to be plastic. They could just be paper. There's no magnetic strip or anything. And they just made the change. They just went, oh yeah, that makes sense. And they switched over to recycled paper. I've reached out to a number of restaurants, little restaurants here in Los Angeles, where I was getting a straw automatically in my water. And I just sent them an email and I said, hey, I loved my experience at your restaurant. I realized that I got a straw by default. And I would like you guys to know that if you just put out a little sign saying, we don't give out we give out only paper straws by request, or some similar alternative, more people are going to feel positively about that than negatively. There are always going to be a few people who are like, hey, you're taking what I'm used to. But most people are going to think, oh, they're taking responsibility. I should patronize them. And I got a very positive response from them by email where they said, we've already been considering this and your input really helped us in kind of just deciding to do that. You can make little changes piece by piece with all of the places that you are already buying from. And that you love as brands and retailers. Spreading the word. You guys know this as animal activists. Knowing that compassion is important, that animals have feelings, that animals are emotional, let's say, agents, emotional creatures, that we can live without exploiting animals, that is a perfectly useful and reasonable way for human culture to go about its business. Is quite new to a lot of people, as I'm sure you guys have experienced. So using terms that help to make connections in people's heads is so important for social advocacy. Refusing single-use plastics, specifically, putting that idea in people's heads. Discussing the objective of a closed-loop economy, or noting that all plastic purchases are also a vote for the oil industry, in the appropriate context, really helps people to think about things critically and make the change. I hadn't really even thought about plastics in the way that I had. I had a general sense that plastic was a problem, and I hated seeing litter on the street, which is how most people encounter a trash problem. But I was getting exposed to the value of living perhaps more minimalist or sort of low waste life, and suddenly it just clicked. I was like, all these things came together at once, and I thought, this is really something that I want to do in order to be a part of the future that I want to see. not as a hermit who refuses to participate in the industrial world, but as a way of modeling what is possible, how humans can live just as happily, or even more so, without all the damage. And so, if you guys are interested in becoming a part of this, in sort of presenting where you are, uh, something that we're trying to do through Five Gyres is extend our educational network. You can reach out to me directly. Feel free to call me or give me an email. I'm happy to be available to you. You can find me at zerowastewizard.com, and I can help you become an educator, maybe in science classes in your neighborhood. That's what I've been doing and have been helping friends to do. And, with all of this, we can really push for a much more informed public that becomes part of a much more informed system. All right. And if you have liked this presentation and would like me to give presentations to any other organizations that you're associated with, feel free to reach out to me too. So apart from that, I also I don't know if all of these codes are still standing because I organized this about a year ago, but there are some discounts on some of these alternatives. Dental lace, which is a biodegradable floss alternative, brush with bamboo, Tushy, which is working on trying to eliminate paper towels, or not paper towels, but toilet paper, etc. And also, if you buy from Life Without Plastic or Imperfect Produce, you can find if you click those links on my zerowastewizard.com page, that gives me a little bit of a kickback as an affiliate. So you can check those out too. But and here are two great, at the very end, two great infographics that you guys can share. Feel free to share it through social media and tag B0, which has been helping to put all this information out, as well as Five Gyres or any other environmental organization that you would like to. But just getting these things out there is really, really important. And getting them out in a comprehensive and actionable way is super important too. Not just straw bans, don't use plastic bottles, but having a sense of what the entirety of it is. Something else that I would recommend for you guys, it doesn't quite work within the scope of this presentation, is I highly recommend looking at two videos. You guys might want to type this down. One is The Story of Stuff of Plastic Water Bottles, which gives you a great background, not just on how plastic water bottles became such a thing, but their impact and also the history of manufactured demand in our economy. That's one thing. And then if you also look up National Geographic Plastic, that should give you the history of plastic. That will give you a great background on how we got to where we are in terms of plastic use in modern America. So that's it, everybody. That sort of takes me to the end. So if you have any questions, happy to take them. Yeah, that's the end of it there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so, so much, Miles, for this incredible presentation.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, I'm very excited that you were able to put it all together because it's something that I've been curious about. And as an activist, we do want to help the animals, and I know that that what you're doing and how you're presenting this to different people so that they learn, especially with the younger students, about how the plastics impact animals. Many of the sea creatures that we've seen, the sea turtles, they ingest plastic bags because they think that they're uh, the oh, it's on the tip of my tongue, but
Jellyfish.
the jellyfish. Thank you. And other times, even just going to visit, like the Marine Mammal Stranding Center. When I was visiting there, it's on the East Coast. They showed what the contents of a seabird were, and most of it was plastics. And even these amazing albatrosses, they end up feeding their babies little shiny plastic things because they appear to be looking similar to the type of food that they would normally feed their babies. So this is a really serious issue for animal activists. We don't want animals around the world eating plastic because we know it's not at all nutritious and very damaging and fatal when animals eat these items. So everything that we can do in our own way, and it's so empowering to know that we can ourselves just make a few actions and make a huge difference. So thank you for all of these resources.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think that as I'm sure most everybody here knows, that activism is usually a multi-tier endeavor. You want, say, a governmental policy to change, corporate approaches to change. And, it's so important, I think, as individuals, especially where we have some control over this, the materials we use, their distinct alternatives, to really participate as consumers and materialists in that sense. Otherwise, I think we lose some of our footing. There are so many environmental meetings that I've gone to, whether it was around animal activism or the Sierra Club, something that has more to do with sort of public lands and sort of general conservation practices, where everybody was using plastic bottles and all these things. It's really only rising to the consciousness fairly recently. And I think, it's not just about being good for the environment again. It just has such broad-based positives, which I think will be one of our great selling points as environmental activists into the next few years. So,
Yes. And I'm wondering if anyone here who's watching either in our webinar or if you're watching on Facebook Live on the In Defense of Animals or any other page, you're welcome to type your questions into the chat box. If you're with us on the computer, you can type them if you have a question for Miles. And if you're with us on the telephone, then you can press *4 to unmute yourself, and then you can ask a question directly to Miles. It's one of the nice things about this interactive program. So any questions, feel free to ask away. Looking here in the chat box. Oh, yes, please. Tell us your name.
Hello?
Yes, what's your name?
Oh, Lisa. Hi, this is Monique.
Hi, Monique. Do you have a question for Miles?
I do.
Hi, Monique.
2 quick comments, though. Hi, Miles. Thank you for your information. Just quickly, I had gone to India, and the cows walk up, along with the cars and bicycles and whatnot, and they were ingesting plastic, and so it was really deathly for them. So I'm so glad that they're thinking about banning plastic. And then my question for you would be, a lot of younger people are looking into the change, the movement. But what about the older people? How do you recommend getting across to them, including the fact that I can't believe that some communities still don't have recycling for plastics. It boggles my mind. Like they'll pick through garbage and try to find the bottles and whatnot, rather than actually having a system. It doesn't make sense to me. Even in Los Angeles County, some communities don't have them, and I really want to change the system. I'm in one of those communities in Sunland, but actually, So the greater question is, how do you get the older people to change?
Well, so I think something that's especially interesting about zero waste practices is that before a certain time, we were all zero waste, right? I mean, wherever your family came from in the world, or however wealthy they were at any time, probably the wealthiest people in Europe 130 years ago, at least in material terms, were far less wasteful, person to person, than anybody at any economic level for the most part in modern America, because there just wasn't the facility for wasting. I mean, things were reused or things were biodegradable. Um, there was glass and there was metal, but those things were infinitely recast. Um, so I think something that you can communicate to people who are older is like, this is not airy fairy, hippy dippy tree hugging type of stuff. I mean, this is like how people live. I mean, this is what your grandparents did. Like this is personal responsibility for what you have and what you use. Um, and then into the future, we're talking about sort of material technological changes and sort of returning to some of these older ways of doing things. But zero waste exists very much into the past, almost infinitely, and into the future as a necessity. So I think creating that bridge between the old and the new, electric cars are actually old, right? We all know that they were the first cars that were being produced, but with these practices, they do exist along that continuum. And I think encouraging people to think about it as a part of that inheritance helps to create kind of a positive feeling around it. It's difficult to convince some people, But if environmental quality is not what convinces people, I think sometimes it can be about buying in bulk, actually sitting down with somebody. If you're talking about an uncle or an aunt or your parents, sitting down with them and saying, "Hey, I really care about this. I care about this both personally, but also because it's an environmental issue. But I want to help you guys save money." Something that I often explain to teenagers, who are into this kind of stuff, but are having some trouble communicating it to their parents. I say, "Hey, you know what you could do? Go to your parents and you say, I'm going to be your waste management advisor, and I'm going to help you save $4,000 to $6,000 a year by changing our material habits as a family. And what you can do is take that money and put it in my college fund." So, there are so many ways of approaching this that give it a sense of personability and also existing along that timeline. So it's not new, it's just the better way of doing things. That's been the most effective way that I've found in communicating to people who aren't naturally into it.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good.
Excellent. I love that tip. That's really important to know the best way to communicate with people of all ages, and especially that idea of putting the savings into a college fund. I think that's super helpful too. So I'm just checking in with our group here and see if anyone else has a question they'd like to ask. Thank you, Monique, for asking a question. That was great. If anybody else would like to, please go ahead.
Hi, this is Chris.
Hi, Chris.
Yeah,
Sure.
I was just wondering, they said sometimes the people that had disabilities, they have a problem with not having a straw or something like that. And like if they go into a restaurant or something, it helps them to have some kind of a plastic straw or something so they can suck through it and stuff. And what would you say to them?
Oh, I would say absolutely they should have a reserve of plastic straws for people who need them. The matter with plastics is not that plastic is evil or it has no uses. I mean, we'd much rather use plexiglass in cars than, stained glass or anything like that, right? Like we want things that, plastic is a miracle material. It's no lie. I mean, it has broad-based industrial, scientific, and medical applications. The issue is the default. So only a very small population of people are going to need plastic straws or even really require them. So we should absolutely take care of people who need to use straws because of disability, but we should take it out of being a cultural default. That's the thing. I think that as these plastic straw bans have been going up around the country and around the world, you have had this kickback saying, there is this ableist issue here. But
Yeah.
frankly, I think a lot of it is quite overblown and has to do with, a plastic industry defense. It becomes about personal liberty.
Mm-hmm.
People get to use their straws if they want to use them, rather than understanding that this is a systemic issue. We can totally take care of everybody involved in this equation, but we have to stop using as many as these needlessly as we do. So it is important to, I think, for people who get overzealous about any kind of activism. I'm sure all of you guys have experienced that as animal activists. People are like, well, what about humans? Why don't you care about humans? Why do you care about animals? That's a very common response that you get. And you think, well, I care about animals and humans, and often I care about animals because of humans, and vice versa. And so I think that's something just to help people understand if they feel like things are being just pulled out of their hands. So that's my understanding of the situation.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Chris, for that question.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm looking and seeing, it looks like we've got one from our chat box here. It says in Australia, there's a big push for recycle and houses that are provided with rubbish bins, recycling, etc. Unfortunately, the recycled material from these bins end up in enormously huge storage halls where they linger for ages. How to convince the government not to produce plastic at all?
It's a difficult thing, like all kinds of sort of, we sort of corporate and government interfaces, say around the oil industry, around factory farming, dairy subsidies, all these things. It's quite difficult. When I speak with other activists within plastics and the material economy, I think that there are certain things that are going to be banned. It will have to do a lot with limitation, just reducing plastic to what it's really necessary for. Um, I think that right now it really looks like just making people more sensitive to that. Plastic bag bans, straw bans, single-use plastic bans, etc., seem to be the sort of the the action du jour in how to make governments do their job around plastics. But I think over the long term, it's going to be about changing the culture to reducing to exactly what plastic should be. The issue with a lot of recycling is that we produce far more plastic than could be recycled. I mean, we do not have the infrastructure to do it. We were shipping off about 50% of our plastic waste to China until the beginning of this year. They just said, no, not anymore. Because they were using it as, they were recycling it, using it for different purposes within their growing economy. Now that they exist at a certain economic, threshold, they're like, we're not a junk economy anymore. We are a first world economy. We are a competitor with the United States, and we're not taking your garbage anymore. So that seems to be where the geopolitics of plastic is right now. But culturally, it's going to have to do with reducing what we use, knowing exactly what plastic is good for, and making sure the government accommodates for that. But yeah, I think something that you can do for any local government that you might be in contact with or sending messages off to is sort of asking for some of these bans that we see happening that already have literature around them in places all around the world for bags and other single-use plastics. So that's my understanding of that whole scene.
Thanks, Miles. That's helpful to give us a background and even an international perspective, which you seem to have because you've done a lot of research on this. And I'm learning so many new things just from hearing your answers to the questions. So
Good. I'm glad.
yeah. And thanks for putting together this webinar for us. We're about at the end of our time here, so I wanted to thank you for sharing your wisdom with us as the Zero Waste Wizard, and also to thank everyone who's joined us, because we're all leading such busy lives, and I'm so grateful to each of you who tune in to learn more information so that we can be better advocates for the animals. And that's what these webinars are all about. We do offer them monthly, and we have our next one will be by a woman who calls herself the Friendly Vegan. Her name is Anne, and she's going to share with us her strategies for vegan advocacy without running into conflict with others. So we've got a whole various grouping of tools that we'd like to share with you. So Miles, thank you very, very much. Is there anything else you want to share with people before we tune off?
You're welcome. I mean, I think I could just wrap up by saying that I know that your focus is animal advocacy and conservation, and I think that this is just a perfectly sort of synced in toolkit. Just it's easy to maybe not immediately make all these changes, but to gradually make these changes and make this a part of how you live in the world and defend animals in the way that you're seeking to do. So I think it's really great that we're able to create this intersection between these two major environmental concerns. Yeah.
Yes, and that is a huge, I think it's really an accomplishment, actually, because environmentalism and animal rights, we really do want to go hand in hand, and it's something that for those of us who are involved in both communities to consider that an intersectional issue so that we can really join together to save the animals and to save the planet.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you so much for having me, Lisa.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. And one little shout out for any activists who want support, whether it's to strategize how to engage environmental activists with animal rights, or whether it's if you want more resources like Miles has presented to us, you can always reach out to us our activist support site, which is idausa.org/activist support. And we even have a support line where people can call for free counseling. And we do help folks with compassion fatigue or any conflicts or communication issues you may be having. So we're here for you, and so glad that you could tune in. And thanks again to Miles, and we look forward to seeing you all next time.
All right. Thank you, everybody. You have a great weekend.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye.